you so much for joining me on the podcast for my thesis, where I'm talking about the collaboration between intimacy directors and stage managers. Can you start by just telling me about your journey as an intimacy director and just like what got you here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me here. I'm very excited. It's good to see you.
Yeah.
So my journey as an intimacy director started through stage combat, actually, because the job of a fight director is to keep people safe and tell these stories of violence. And one of the things, we have a lot of talk about safety in stage combat, but for a long time there wasn't a lot of talk about consent. And then because intimacy director wasn't necessarily a role that had a name to it,
right,
a lot of fight directors would be asked to just take care of the intimacy as well, especially if there was like sexual violence in scenes. So a bunch of us started noticing that this is a huge oversight. We're not talking about consent. We're talking a lot about physical safety. We're not talking about emotional safety or mental health and wellness. And we're doing these scenes that we're actually not really trained in.
Right.
We're trained to throw a punch, but are we really trained to teach people how to kiss?
Right.
That's wildly different. So for me, my journey started with just the consent piece. I started really diving into what is consent, what does that look like in the world as a whole, and especially everything that was going on in the world. The Me Too movement was really big at the time.
Yeah.
A lot of things were happening in Profiles Theater, not in our house in Chicago. That was going on. So that was leading a lot of conversations.
Right.
So I was looking at that, and then I started looking at what does consent mean for us as theater artists. Right? Because it's the same, but it's also different. So when I was living in Philadelphia, I was doing a lot of workshops on theatrical consent. And what does it mean to consent to anything when in terms of a performance or in terms of a role? And then from that, it kind of just started growing. I started getting called in to do more intimacy choreography. I started training more specifically for intimacy choreography and intimacy direction. I had already done a lot of mental health first aid, a lot of bystander advocacy training. I worked a lot with the Transgender Institute in Philadelphia, who are fantastic. Just getting to know different people and different ways of life and how I can advocate for people who aren't like me, you know. And then it just kind of evolved, and I started doing more and more intimacy direction, and I love it.
Yeah. What goes into training an intimacy director?
So there's a lot, just like anything, just like any field, there's a lot of training. There's, of course, the choreography piece, right? Understanding masking, understanding story, understanding acting, breath work, body shapes, all of that, all of the typical theater stuff that you would need to understand.
Right.
But then there's also understanding mental health, understanding trauma-informed practices. Right. If somebody gets triggered or if somebody has a big reaction to something, we're there. We're not therapists. We're not trained therapists. We're not there to do that, but we are there to help. Like first aid, people who are trained to be first aid, they can help in an emergency, but they're not doctors. Right. It's the same thing. People trained in mental health first aid can help in the interim before we get them to the help that they need if they need further help.
Got it.
Right. Okay. Help people stay grounded. So a lot of mental health first aid, a lot of work with different marginalized groups. Especially for me as a white woman, it was really important that I learn a lot about other people's experiences from different groups, different people, different cultures, because I'm called in to work with different stories relating to those things and different people. And I need to have a better understanding, as much as I can, an understanding of where other people are coming from. So yeah, a lot of that, a lot of bystander advocacy training, being able to call something out when I see it. Right. If a director is overstepping, or a stage manager, or producer, or anybody else, another actor, right? I have the ability to be able to stand up and say, this isn't right, this needs to stop, or we need to take a break, or whatever you need to do in the instance.
How early in the process do you think an intimacy director should join for a theatrical production to help identify if indeed your responsibilities are needed, or your tools are needed in a production?
The sooner the better. I've been brought in as soon as, hey, we're thinking about doing this piece. Are you potentially available? Right. Are you interested? Or, hey, we're going to be working on this piece. Could you give it a read, take a look, and let us know if maybe there's something we're missing, maybe if you can help us out with it. So the sooner the better. Because if I can be involved in the pre-production side of it, so the way that we set it up, the way we cut the script, the way we start talking about, well, who is this play for? Who's going to be doing the play? Where are we putting this play up? And the casting notices go out. Sometimes I can help talk about the language, right? Because if there's going to be a very charged scene or the words are escaping me right now. Something really big, right? Something that really big, like something that could be really have a really big impact, emotional impact on somebody. Then hey, let's put this in the notice so that people know what they're auditioning for.
That's interesting that you bring that up. I had a conversation with Taylor Williams, who was the casting director for Slave Play, and she mentioned that was one of her first experiences working with a casting director in the casting process because of what the play is about and just like how heavy it is. And she also mentioned that she did a play where in the side that they were auditioning with, there was a stage direction that said the character takes off their bra from underneath their clothes, and the actor did it in the audition, but they didn't expect the actors to do the stage directions because that's not a normal thing. And so not that it alarmed anybody, but it was like, maybe this is something that we need to have someone in the room to just kind of like be there to make it feel safe or just be around in case someone feels uncomfortable because they're taking off a piece like a bra in front of someone that they, and it's just the actor being all in and committing, but you just want to make sure that everybody around is comfortable feeling that way. So I thought that was really interesting. Yeah,
that's a really interesting story. And I wonder if how on board the actor was doing it. Maybe they saw it in the script and were like, oh, well, this might be expected. Maybe I should do it. And then was that actually something they were comfortable with? Or were they doing it just to show that, hey,
So that could be something that's in the casting notice that's like, don't feel the need to do the stage directions and focus on the words or something like that.
Right, and very specifically, there should never be any undressing. There's no nudity in auditions. Right. But not everyone knows that.
Yeah, and so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting.
So you mentioned that you can come as early as people giving you the script and you identifying the moments of intimacy, which we did together in Octoroon, including with fight choreography as well. What do you do if you feel like there's a written moment that is intimate, but the director doesn't agree that it is intimate? Like, what happens if there's discrepancies in what you see and what the director sees versus like, it can be they want it to be intimate, but you don't feel like it needs to be, or the other way around?
When you say they don't feel that it's intimate, or do you mean that they don't feel that you need an intimacy?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great question. If I'm being hired to work on a show as the intimacy director, then I'm going to assume any time that the actors are going to touch, or anytime they're going to share an intimate moment where they may need some support, then I'm going to ask that I'm at least in the room. Because I am the intimacy director, and at the end of the day, it is my name going on the program saying that was my role.
Right.
So I want to be in the room.
Right.
I'm also going to be having conversations with the actors outside of rehearsal to touch base on, hey, there's this moment here. This is what the director is thinking. This is what their expectations are. What are your boundaries? How do you feel about it? Is it really important to you that I'm present in the room, or do you feel comfortable working it out with the director without me? And we can go that way as well. But if the actors are advocating for themselves and saying, no, we want the intimacy director here, then I'm going to be there for sure. Because that's my job.
Yeah.
That's exactly why I'm there.
Got it. You mentioned mental health aid and all of that. What tools do you provide stage managers and company to be able to practice once you're not a part of the process on a daily basis? Because I'm sure that I'm like every other designer or creative team, like there's a point where your contract ends and the show goes on without you in it. So I guess what are the tools? What does that collaboration look like with us as stage managers? Because we are overseeing the whole thing and making sure that everybody feels safe.
Yeah, so that's also awesome. These are great questions.
Thank you.
So when I'm doing choreography, and that's part of my training, is when I'm setting down the choreography, in addition to making sure I'm telling a story, I'm making sure that it's sustainable, that everything that they're doing, they can be doing for 6 months, a year, right? They're doing the same thing. That's why choreography is really important, because if they're just going to wing it, then it'll change, it'll ebb and flow over time, and it tends to get really muddy for a lot of reasons. So it's sustainable choreography. The stage managers, they write everything down, just like they notate blocking. They also notate the choreography. So they have this piece of paper in front of them. So if the actors start to deviate away from the choreography, the stage manager can say, hey, this is the choreography. Just like they would say, hey, you're not saying that line right. Yeah. I mean, that's not the words that they use, but they check lines. They also check the choreography.
Got it.
So that's sustainable. Any kind of intimacy for kissing, for nudity, for even really heightened moments of intimacy, there can be a placeholder that if there's a specific touch or there's a specific piece of clothing taken off, that maybe in rehearsals or in tech, they don't want to do it. We've got something in place for that.
Yeah.
So the story continues on, but they don't actually have to kiss 1,000,000 times in a rehearsal. So things like that can be in play. And then also check-ins, right? We've got intimacy calls, just like a fight call before a show. You run all the fights. There's an intimacy call where you don't have to necessarily always run all of the intimacy, the physical choreography, but at the very least you check in with each other. Hey, how has it been going? Is everything good? How are your boundaries? Anything need to change tonight? Are we good? Fantastic. Let's go.
Now that you say that, do you think, or have you been in a room where, because you know how there's dance captains, fight captains. Is there an intimacy captain? Is that something that is included in the team?
There can be. At this point, I don't think that Equity has any language about intimacy captains. I know that they're working on fight captain. But there absolutely can be an intimacy captain. Usually the stage manager will act as an intimacy captain because they're watching the show, they're not in it, and they can follow along with everything. But there can be another actor acting as intimacy captain. If there's somebody who is not involved in the intimacy, if there's somebody that the actors trust, if there's somebody who maybe is off stage and able to watch from the wings what's going on, or on a video, a monitor, not a video. But usually the stage manager is the best person for it because the power dynamic there is kind of already set. Right. And then if you introduce that to another actor, sometimes that can get a little messy with intimacy.
That's interesting. It reminds me of on Octoroon when we worked on fight choreography specifically, where I was in the room the entire time and I didn't have an assistant, right? But the actors, because of the nature, the show was an educational setting, they were also getting trained by you. They felt comfortable being each other's fight captains at a point, but I was also like there. And so I think that it's interesting, like the power dynamic conversation of, it can also be like a community like agreement, a collaborative agreement that it can either be the stage manager or a member of the company.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's interesting. Because the reason I'm making this thesis is because my first show was Halfway Bitches Go Straight to Heaven with you. And it was a first grad school show, and it was, violence. There was a sex scene. There was everything. And so I found myself very intrigued and interested in intimacy direction and fight choreography. And I remember mentioning, I'm going to get trained so that I can do this. And it's also like another tool in my toolkit as a stage manager. But it also there's the other side of the coin where we already oversee so much as stage managers that maybe adding that on as a responsibility to be the intimacy director or fight choreographer in the room is like a lot. And so I'm trying to advocate for the role to be present in support of us and each other, and as a collaborative space to not only make sure that the space is brave and safe, but to just make sure that everybody's doing the things that they need to do in the way that the healthiest way.
Yeah.
And so I know that we took seminars with you a while back, and they were very helpful to me in other productions that didn't even include specific scenes that involved kissing, touching, or nudity, but actors would vocalize wanting to check in every morning or at the top of rehearsal. Even shows that involved topics of sexual assault, abuse, trauma, but we didn't act it out, but they were in that headspace. You still have to like do some check-ins and like cool downs and all of that. And so I took your training and the tools that you gave us in order to put those in place and for the actors to feel safe and supported, because we didn't have the support, that we didn't have that person there, because you're one person here at Columbia, there's only one of you, and obviously there's a priority of productions, and this was a playwright thesis, so we had less of a like priority on the list, I guess. And we had one intimacy director, virtual, in California, who came once for that specific play on Zoom. And she was just like, she tried her best. It was a first-time director. And it was a play of like straight cis men talking about abuse. And he was just like, we're tough, we can do it, we can figure it out. But then we had this person here that I feel like that kind of shut down her like role in the play in a way. And so it was up to stage managers to kind of make sure that everybody, they handled it fine. But I was just like alert about it.
Sure.
She did provide like a sheet of paper that was just like a check-in every week. They would have to submit, how are you feeling? How's the subject matter like treating you and all of that. And so I guess I say all of this to ask if you recommend stage managers to receive training or some sort of seminar in intimacy direction, fight choreography, anything, so that we can be of support in cases where we don't have the support of an intimacy director in the room. And then the second part of that question is, what are your expectations of us with you in the room?
I think 1,000,000% yes. This training is so valuable to stage managers, not to train them to be intimacy directors, because you're already stage managers, right? And you do have so much on your plate. I think it's an impossible ask to ask somebody to be a stage manager and also something else, regardless of what it is, because so much goes into being a stage manager. Not that they can't stage manage this show and intimacy direct that show. That's not what I'm saying. But I think that having the training is important, because there's a big part of the training is understanding power dynamics and power structures. And stage managers are very much a part of that, and they work with that all the time. It's also interpersonal relationships and how to talk to people and how to communicate with people, how to keep the production healthy. Right? A lot of that falls on the stage manager, making sure everybody is safe, and physically and emotionally and mentally, making sure that everybody is being taken care of, making sure that everybody's boundaries are being respected, checking in with everyone. And not just the actors, but everybody, the directors, the crew, the whole team has to be on board with the story that you're telling and the way that you're telling the story.
Fair.
You have to have consent from everybody. And then you bring in the audience and you've got that layer. So I think this training is extremely helpful just on that respect. Also, I think in my experience, directors will rely often on stage managers to communicate notes, right? So if stage managers have the language, then they're able to act as kind of an intermediary. Well, the director is saying this, what they mean is this, what they want is this, right? And sometimes you can play with your words to get that across in a way that these actors understand. Also safety. You know, if there is no there's no intimacy director on set or in rehearsal, then if the director is asking actors to do something that is unsafe, whether they may not even know it, but then the stage manager can say, oh, could we look at it this way, or could we take a break? Could we maybe have a sidebar? Right. And that's really important. And again, this advocacy training, that's what you're doing. Like, you're constantly looking for you're not looking for those moments, but when those moments arise where something is happening that needs to stop, the stage manager has to be able to stand up and say.
Yes.
Right? I mean, not that it all falls on the stage manager's shoulders. It shouldn't. Everyone has their own level of responsibility, but oftentimes it does all fall on the stage manager's shoulders.
Yeah.
So this training can only help. It can only help.
Yeah. I remember in Halfway, I don't think you were in that rehearsal, and I won't say any names, but there was a moment when we were doing the scene that you worked on very heavily, and we were marking it. The actors agreed that they were going to mark it.
Yeah.
And I think in the heat of the moment, one of them did not mark it and went full. And I saw it in the other person's face that they were like, this is not what we agreed on. I was a second stage manager in a group of 3, and I wasn't close with the director, so I didn't know how to like stop it, but I immediately was like, hey, to the PSM, I'm like, I don't think that was, I mean, we trusted that they were checking in with each other, and we saw that they checked in with each other, and they told us what they agreed on.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I don't think that felt the way that we discussed. It felt bigger. And we like talked amongst like refs do in plays, where they're like, did we see the same thing? And so while we couldn't stop it in the moment, the PSM did go up and like after on a break, checked in with them and make sure that they were like, okay, we're gonna do it again, but we really need to make sure that we agree on what we're doing, because it's not like anybody felt unsafe, but it wasn't what was agreed on. And so it did shift. And they were frustrated as an actor, like their skill didn't show up in other places because they were flustered by that. And so, yes, we do have that instinct, so the training will like elevate it even more. So, yeah, I'm very passionate about this. I don't think every play needs it. I understand that. But if a play needs it, I want to be an advocate for that. Especially here at Columbia. I've been trying so hard to be like, please just give us more resources for every production, because one person isn't enough.
Right.
And the people that we do get should not be on Zoom on the other side of this country. And so that is why I'm just having this conversation, so that we can talk about what we can do in the lack of that person when that person's not around, or how much can we advocate, at least in this institution, for it. And I think at least Michael, and I will say his name, he has a stage manager teaching intimacy direction for stage managers now, and I think that's a huge advantage for us.
Yes.
And so I'm excited to see how that goes. I'm excited to see how the industry takes it too, because it's also a new position in the industry post-pandemic, post-Me Too. And I know that there's one particular individual, Ancy James. They are an intimacy director, they're a culture specialist, they're a sensitivity director. They have many different layers, and they've worked on many different productions. And so just knowing that we're heading into a world where theater is being more inclusive and like mindful of people's well-being, I think in a more proactive way than they have in the past, is very exciting.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah?
Absolutely. And like I said before, more training is always good.
Yeah.
So the more you know, the more you can help. And I think Columbia has done a great job in getting this ball rolling. There's been a lot of work that's been done in shaping what intimacy looks like at Columbia. Do we need more? Yes, of course. Like there's always more. Yeah, because something else that Columbia does that I really, really love is they don't stop students from doing what they want to do. Like they're here to learn, they're here to grow. So we try to do everything we can so that we can provide that for them. And sometimes that just means we don't always have enough boots on the ground to help. But somewhere it exists. Like you gave us how many? We had like 4 sessions with you last year where we were just like diving deep into that. Yeah. So you teach fight choreography here. Do you have an intimacy direction course for actors, or is it just specific like fight course, stage combat? At Columbia?
Yeah.
No, I work with, alongside CETA, I work with the first years with some intimacy stuff, and I see them in stage combat, and then I work with them a lot in their productions. I'm with the actors a lot.
Yeah.
So we kind of get it in ways that we can. It would be great. We've been trying to get an intimacy course, to get an actual course going, but it's difficult. You'll keep trying.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all I have for now. Thank you so much for joining me today,
pleasure.
for answering all the questions. You're fantastic.
Thank
and
you.
I admire you so much.
Oh, thank you so much.
And I'll see you around.